The house was supposed to be my fresh start. But 3 weeks after moving in, I knocked down a rotten wall and found a hidden steel door no one knew existed. What was inside would expose a family secret buried for over 40 years and put my life in danger. My name is Ethan Carter, and at 32 years old, I had just made the worst financial decision of my life. At least, that's what everyone told me. The old Victorian mansion sat at the edge of town like a forgotten ghost. The roof sagged in places. The windows were cracked. Weeds swallowed most of the front yard. Local kids dared each other to run up to the porch at night. No one wanted it. That's why it sold at auction for only $11,000. When I signed the paperwork, even the auction clerk looked surprised. "Son," he said quietly, "some things are cheap for a reason." I laughed. I wish I hadn't. The first week was exhausting. The electricity barely worked. The plumbing groaned like an old man every time I turned on a faucet. And every night, strange creaking sounds echoed through the walls. Still, I was happy. For the first time since my divorce, I felt like I was building something that belonged to me. Then, one afternoon, while tearing down damaged drywall in the upstairs hallway, I noticed something strange. The measurements didn't make sense. The hallway should have ended 6 feet earlier than it did. At first, I thought I'd calculated wrong, but after measuring 3 more times, the same number appeared. 6 missing feet. 6 feet hidden inside the walls. My stomach tightened. I grabbed a hammer and started breaking through the drywall. Within minutes, dust filled the air. Then my hammer struck metal. Clang. I froze. Behind the wall wasn't another room. It was a steel door, a door with no handle, no hinges visible from the outside, and carved into the metal were 3 words that made my blood run cold. "Do not open." I stared at the warning. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't seen in over 10 years. My grandfather's former business partner, the man who attended my grandfather's funeral, the man who disappeared the very next day. With shaking hands, I answered. The old man's voice sounded terrified. "Ethan," he paused, then whispered, "They found you before I could." My heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" Silence. Then one final sentence. "The room was never supposed to be opened." The line went dead. And at that exact moment, I heard footsteps downstairs. Someone had entered the house. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The phone slipped from my hand and landed on the dusty floor with a crack. The footsteps below stopped. Silence filled the house. I stood frozen in front of the steel door hidden inside the wall, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just an animal. Maybe someone had entered by mistake. But deep down, I knew better. The fear in the old man's voice wasn't fake. "They found you before I could." The words echoed through my head. Slowly, I picked up my hammer and moved toward the staircase. Each step creaked beneath my feet. The house felt different now, like it was holding its breath, waiting. I reached the top of the stairs and looked down. Nothing. The front door was closed. The living room was empty. The kitchen was dark. No movement. No sound. Yet I knew I had heard someone. I slowly walked downstairs. The hammer felt heavy in my hands. When I entered the kitchen, I stopped. The back door was open, just slightly. A cold breeze drifted inside. I was certain I had locked it earlier. Someone had been there, and they had left. But why? And how did they know about the hidden room? That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying everything. The mysterious phone call, the warning on the steel door, the footsteps, the open back door. Nothing made sense. Around 3 in the morning, I finally decided to search the house records online. The property had changed owners several times. Most of the information was ordinary. Then, I found something strange. The house had originally belonged to a man named Walter Hughes, my grandfather. Except there was a problem. According to every family story I'd ever heard, my grandfather had never owned this house. My mother always claimed he spent his entire life on a small farm 2 counties away. Yet official records showed he purchased the mansion in 1978 and kept it for almost 15 years. Why would my family hide that? What else were they hiding? The next morning, I drove straight to my mother's house. When she opened the door, she smiled, but the smile disappeared the moment she saw my face. "Ethan? We need to talk." Immediately, her expression changed. She stepped aside. I entered the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the room. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I placed a printed property record on the table. Her face turned pale. "Where did you get this? So it's true?" Silence. "Mom." Her hands trembled. "I asked you a question." She sat down slowly. The color had drained from her face. "Your grandfather owned that house. Why did everyone lie about it?" Tears appeared in her eyes. "Because your grandfather made us promise." "Promise what?" She looked away. For a long time she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Never go back there." A chill ran through me. "What happened in that house?" She shook her head. "I don't know everything. Tell me what you do know." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in my life I saw genuine fear in them. "When I was 16, your grandfather disappeared for 3 days." I frowned. "What?" "He came back injured. He wouldn't tell anyone what happened. Then he sold most of his property and moved away." I stared. "That's it?" She swallowed. "No." The room became silent. There was another man. "Who?" "A friend. Business partner. He vanished." Completely. I immediately remembered the phone call. The old man. My grandfather's former business partner. The one who had somehow survived. My stomach tightened. "Mom, did his name happen to be Arthur Bennett?" Her eyes widened. "How do you know that name?" I didn't answer, because suddenly another realization hit me. Arthur wasn't dead. Arthur had called me. That evening, I returned to the mansion. The hidden steel door waited exactly where I left it. I examined it carefully. Years of dust covered the surface. The warning remained visible. "Do not open." Most people would have listened. Most people would have walked away. I wasn't most people. I needed answers. Using a crowbar, I searched the edges of the frame. Finally, I discovered a hidden latch. The mechanism clicked. The steel door slowly opened. A blast of stale air rushed out. Darkness waited beyond. I turned on my flashlight. A narrow staircase descended underground. Far underground. I hesitated, then started walking. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. The stairs continued far longer than expected, almost 30 feet below the house. Finally, I reached the bottom. The beam of my flashlight swept across the room, and I froze. It wasn't a secret room. It was an underground bunker. Shelves lined the walls. Boxes covered the floor. Old filing cabinets stood in rows. Someone had spent a fortune building it. My grandfather. But why? I approached the nearest cabinet. Inside were documents, thousands of pages, maps, photographs, bank records, newspaper clippings. Every file seemed connected to one thing, a missing fortune. My pulse quickened. Over 40 years. Earlier, a wealthy industrialist named Leonard Grayson had vanished, along with nearly $60 million. The case had never been solved. The money had never been recovered. Yet my grandfather had spent decades investigating it. Why? Then I found a photograph. The picture slipped from my fingers. Because standing beside Leonard Grayson was a younger version of my grandfather, smiling. They knew each other. Suddenly, a sound echoed above me. A door slammed. My blood ran cold. I switched off the flashlight. Silence. Then another sound. Footsteps. Inside the house. Someone was there again. Only this time they weren't leaving. They were searching. I stood motionless in the darkness, listening. The footsteps moved from room to room, slow, methodical, like someone hunting for something or someone. Me. I waited nearly 20 minutes before climbing back upstairs. When I finally reached the hidden door, I carefully peeked through the opening. The hallway was empty. I emerged quietly. Everything seemed normal. Then I saw it. A note, placed directly on the floor. Fresh. It hadn't been there earlier. My hands shook as I picked it up. 4 words were written in black ink. You opened it. Below that was another message. Now they know. My heart nearly stopped, because at the bottom of the note was a symbol I'd already seen. Inside several of the bunker files, a black circle with 3 lines running through it. Whoever left the note had been inside the bunker before. That night I locked every door, every window, every entrance. Then I began reviewing the documents. Hours passed. The deeper I dug, the stranger everything became. Many files referenced something called Project Hollow. Others mentioned names crossed out in red ink. Entire pages had been removed. It felt less like a family mystery and more like a conspiracy. Around midnight, I found a leather journal, my grandfather's journal. The first page read, "If you're reading this, I am probably dead." My hands trembled. I turned the page. Trust no one. Another page. The money was never the secret. Another. The bunker was built to protect the evidence. I kept reading. Then I reached an entry dated 6 months before his death. The words made my stomach drop. Arthur believes they're watching us. Arthur! The same Arthur who called me. The same Arthur who vanished. I flipped through more pages desperately. Then I found the final entry. The last words my grandfather ever wrote. If anything happens to me, the key is inside the clock. The entry ended there. No explanation. No location. No clue which clock. Just one sentence. The key is inside the clock. Suddenly, the lights went out. The entire house plunged into darkness. I jumped from my chair. Power outage, or so I thought. Then I looked outside. The neighboring houses still had electricity. Only mine was dark. Someone had cut the power. A second later, I heard glass shatter downstairs. Someone had broken into the house, again. Only this time, they weren't trying to scare me. They were coming inside, and from the sound of multiple footsteps, there was more than one of them. I grabbed the journal and ran toward the hidden bunker. But before I reached the hallway, a flashlight beam swept across the wall. Someone was already inside, and a voice echoed through the darkness. "Find the journal," a second voice answered. "And find Ethan." I realized with horror that they knew my name. Then another voice spoke. The voice that made my blood freeze, because I recognized it instantly. It belonged to someone I trusted, someone close to my family, someone who should never have known about the house, someone who was supposed to be helping me. And as the flashlight beam moved closer, I finally saw his face. My own uncle. For several seconds, I couldn't move. I stared into the darkness. My uncle stood only 20 feet away. The flashlight in his hand illuminated part of his face, enough for me to recognize him, enough to destroy every excuse my mind was trying to invent. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. My uncle was inside the house, searching for the bunker, searching for the journal, searching for me. My chest tightened. 1,000 childhood memories flashed through my head. Birthday parties, fishing trips, family holidays. The man standing downstairs had been part of my life for as long as I could remember. And now he was leading the people hunting me. I backed away silently. My heart hammered against my ribs. The hidden hallway protected me for the moment, but not for long. They were getting closer. I slipped inside the bunker and carefully closed the steel door. The darkness swallowed me. For several minutes, I heard muffled voices upstairs, drawers opening, furniture moving, glass breaking. They were tearing the house apart, looking for something, looking for the same answers I had just begun uncovering. Then I remembered the journal. The key is inside the clock, the final message from my grandfather. It had to mean something. Maybe everything depended on it. I switched on my flashlight and returned to the journal. This time I read every page carefully. Not skimming, studying, searching for clues. Near the middle of the journal, I found a sentence I had overlooked. When the truth finally comes out, time will reveal everything. Time. Clock. The connection seemed obvious. Then another entry caught my attention. The only witness still stands where it always has. I frowned. What witness? A clock? A building? A person? My grandfather wrote like he expected someone to solve a puzzle, and suddenly I remembered something. A grandfather clock. A massive antique grandfather clock. It had stood in the mansion's entrance hall in dozens of old photographs. But when I bought the house, the clock wasn't there. Someone had removed it. Why? Because it contained the key? My pulse quickened. For the first time, I felt close to the truth. The next morning, after the intruders finally left, I drove to the county archives. The librarian recognized me immediately. "You've been researching the mansion." I nodded. "Do you have old auction records?" Several hours later, she returned with a stack of documents. Most were useless. Then I found something, a receipt. 3 years before the house auction, the grandfather clock had been sold separately. Buyer, Arthur Bennett. I nearly fell out of my chair. Arthur, again. The same man who called me. The same man my family believed had disappeared. The same man who worked with my grandfather. He had the clock, which meant he probably had the key, and maybe the answers. Finding Arthur wasn't easy. The address listed on the receipt was decades old. The house was abandoned. The neighbors hadn't seen him in years. But one elderly woman remembered something. He moved near the lake. What lake? She pointed north. Blackwater Lake. My stomach tightened. Blackwater Lake sat almost 80 miles away, deep in the countryside. Isolated. Perfect for someone hiding. By sunset, I found the cabin. It stood among tall pine trees overlooking the water. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Someone was home. I approached cautiously. Then the front door opened. An old man stepped outside. Thin, gray-haired, weathered by time. But unmistakably Arthur Bennett. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed. "Took you long enough." I froze. "You knew I'd come?" He laughed softly. "Your grandfather always said you were stubborn." The sound of my grandfather's name hit me harder than expected. Arthur motioned toward the cabin. "Come inside." The cabin felt like a museum. Old photographs covered the walls. Boxes of documents filled entire rooms, and standing in the corner, the grandfather clock, the same one from the mansion. I stared at it. Arthur noticed. "That's why you're here." I nodded. "The key." He smiled sadly. "So he finally left you the message." Arthur walked toward the clock, carefully opened a hidden compartment, and removed a small brass key. The object looked ordinary, yet dozens of lives had been shaped by it, maybe destroyed by it. Arthur handed it to me. For several moments I simply stared. "What does it open?" His smile disappeared. "Everything." That night Arthur told me the truth, the real truth, the story my family had spent decades hiding. 40 years. Earlier, Leonard Grayson wasn't simply a wealthy businessman. He was exposing a massive corruption network involving powerful officials, executives, and organized criminals. He had gathered evidence proving millions of dollars were being stolen through fraudulent government contracts. The $60 million everyone searched for wasn't stolen money. It was evidence. Money intentionally moved into protected accounts to expose the people responsible. When Grayson prepared to reveal everything, he vanished. Officially. Unofficially, he was murdered. My grandfather and Arthur had been his closest allies. They escaped with the evidence and spent decades protecting it. The bunker wasn't built for money. It was built for proof. The proof powerful people wanted erased forever. My mouth went dry. So my grandfather. Arthur nodded. He spent the rest of his life protecting the truth. And the people responsible? Arthur's expression darkened. Many became rich. Many became powerful. And some are still alive. Then Arthur revealed something worse. My uncle wasn't working alone. He had discovered fragments of the secret years earlier. Instead of helping expose the truth, he chose greed. He spent years searching for the evidence, believing it would lead him to hidden wealth. He never understood what the files actually contained. And now he had partners. Dangerous partners. People willing to kill for what remained hidden. Just like they had killed Leonard Grayson. Just like they had likely killed my grandfather. The following morning, Arthur and I returned to the mansion. The brass key matched a hidden lock inside one of the bunker cabinets. When it clicked open, I finally understood everything. Inside sat dozens of original recordings, signed confessions, financial records, photographs, letters, names, hundreds of names. Enough evidence to destroy careers, fortunes, and reputations. Enough evidence to explain decades of fear. Enough evidence to explain why my grandfather built a bunker beneath his own home. Then I found one final envelope, addressed to me. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter written by my grandfather. Ethan, if you're reading this, I failed to protect the truth long enough to tell you myself. I never wanted this burden to become yours. But sometimes life chooses people before they're ready. The secret room was never about money. It was about courage. One day, you'll face a choice. Hide the truth and live comfortably, or reveal it and risk everything. Only you can decide what kind of man you become. No matter what happens, know this. I was always proud of you. I couldn't stop the tears. For years I had wondered whether my grandfather truly cared. Now, I finally knew. 3 days later, everything exploded. Arthur and I delivered copies of the evidence to federal investigators, journalists, and attorneys simultaneously. Too many copies, too many locations, too many witnesses. The truth couldn't be buried anymore. The investigation spread nationwide, arrests followed, executives, politicians, business leaders, people once considered untouchable. Some resigned, some fled. Some went to prison, and among those arrested, my uncle. The betrayal hurt, but not as much as the realization that he had chosen greed over family, over and over again. Months later, life finally became quiet. The mansion was restored. The bunker remained hidden. Not because secrets still existed, but because it had become part of the house's history. Arthur visited often. The old man finally seemed at peace. For the first time in decades, he no longer looked over his shoulder. One evening, we sat together on the front porch watching the sunset. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then Arthur smiled. Your grandfather would be proud. I looked toward the house, toward the walls that had hidden the secret room, toward the place where everything began. And I realized something. I thought I had bought an old mansion. Instead, I inherited a responsibility, a legacy, and a truth worth protecting. Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't money, gold, or hidden fortunes. Sometimes they're the truths others are afraid to reveal. Courage isn't about being fearless, it's about doing what's right, even when you're terrified. Because in the end, secrets may stay buried for years, but the truth always finds a way back into the light.